Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first edition episode of GeoStrata Extra. I'm Geo-Institute Director Brad Keeler. Thanks for being with us today. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, feel sorry for you. Maybe you should. We're a member society for geotechnical engineers and geologists. We have about 13,000 members all over the world, and we'd love for you to join us. You can visit our website, which is below us in the description, for more information on how to become a member. We have a magazine that comes out 6 times a year called GeoStrata, and the idea for this series was born out of that. We will be choosing an article or a column from each issue, and about 2 weeks after it hits mailboxes, we'll be doing an extended interview with that author. So our first edition today will be with Scott Anderson. You'll hear from him in a moment. While you're here, you might want to subscribe to the GI YouTube channel. You can do that up there, I believe. Click on the little bell and you'll get all the notifications that you want and some you don't want from us. And check out our other content while you're on the channel as well. Thanks to Jim Withiam, our chief editor at GeoStrata for the past 20 years, for jumping on board with this idea and helping us run with it. For Mary Nodine, our editor today, who's going to be conducting the interview. Scott Anderson for being the first interview subject. And Aaron Harover from our staff at GI for putting all this together. So without any further ado, let's have the first episode of GeoStrata Extra.
All right, thanks, Brad. Here we go. So in this first edition of GeoStrata Extra, I'm going to interview Dr. Scott Anderson, who authored the commentary As Complex as Necessary, but Not More So, in the July-August 2020 issue of GeoStrata. The theme of the issue was Future Geo. We talked about things like machine learning, big data, AI, visualization, and digs. And so Scott's going to kind of dig into some of those topics and touch on some of the other articles in the interview as well. My name is Mary Nodine. I am a project manager with GEI Consultants in Woburn, Massachusetts, north of Boston. I have been an editor with GeoStrata for 4 years, and I've been the author of the GeoPoet column in GeoStrata since 2008. So I'm going to introduce our interviewee. It's Dr. Scott Anderson. Scott is an engineer and geologist with 35 years of experience in research, academia, consulting, and as a leader at the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. He's a principal geotechnical engineer with BGC Engineering in Golden, Colorado, where he focuses on helping partners communicate and manage geotechnical risk to linear and distributed infrastructure. Scott is a certified National Highway Institute instructor and an active committee member and contributor to a number of professional organizations like the Geo-Institute, DFI, TRB, and the Geotechnical Extreme Events Reconnaissance Association. Scott is a member of the National Academies of Science and Engineering's Committee on Geological and Geotechnical Engineering, with responsibilities including moderating a related webinar on data in geotechnical engineering that will be held next week. And I'm signed up for that. I'm pretty excited about it. How is that easy for people to search for? I don't know if we can put that down in the comments somewhere. I tried to do that yesterday, but we'll try to do that at some point. We'll get there. Get the link for that. Scott delivered a popular GeoPit, or Powerful Informative Talk, at the 2019 Geo Congress called We All Saw It the Same Way, in which he spoke about the power of augmented reality in communicating geotechnical concepts. His presentation is posted on the GI YouTube channel, and so if you haven't seen it in person or watched it online, I encourage you to check it out. Scott's commentary in the July-August 2020 issue of GeoStrata offers an intriguing perspective about how we use geotechnical data. In this installation of GeoStrata Extra, we'll delve deeper into Scott's commentary by asking him some probing questions about it and other topics in the issue. If you have questions for Scott, I encourage you to type them into the comments for this video below while you watch, and we'll do our best to address them as time allows. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Mary.
So first, for anyone in the audience who hasn't read your commentary, can you give us a brief summary of the premise?
Well, I guess the premise of the commentary is that in part of this this edition of the magazine, it's all about future geo. I was thinking about not only the augmented reality that I've been using to share complex ideas and communicate them, but also other innovations that we've had in our practice in the past, and whether they've been really as successful as they could have been. And if not, why not? If so, why so? And also kind of thinking about what the other contributors to this edition of the magazine would be bringing to it. I really didn't know what they would be, but I could envision some of them. So I tried to weave a thread through some of the augmented reality communication techniques we've been using, along with some of these other innovations, and the future, which I believe is data rich. And so that's the premise.
All right, great, thank you. The title of your commentary, As Complex as Necessary, but Not More So, is very interesting. Can you tell me why you decided on that title?
Yeah, I think because in our profession, I've been fascinated by our ability to make things simple. I always like that, and that's sort of been a focus. But I think it might actually be a hindrance right now if we're in a world of expanding sources of data and they're becoming everywhere. If we are too focused on being simple, we might miss some opportunities. So really, it doesn't say anything different than Einstein's original quote, but it does introduce the idea of it's okay to be complex.
Got it. That makes sense. And I think hopefully you'll make that case to some people here today. So your commentary provides an intriguing perspective looking at the past, present, and future of geotechnical engineering. So starting with the past, you refer to a pin map as an early example of data tied to a 2D location. Can you elaborate on this concept? And I think this question exposes me as a borderline millennial.
Sure. Yeah, when you drop a pin on Google Earth, they didn't invent that terminology or that idea. That pin maps are quite old, and they could be a map on the wall that's taped to a corkboard or something, where you're actually placing a pin in a location and you're putting some information on that pin. We used to write really small, like a project number or something that would be on the pin that would explain what information is behind that little spot on the map, and that's a pin map. So it's really the earliest form of a GIS. It's information that's geographically arranged on the wall of your office.
So the map was like a map of the file? What was it exactly a map of?
Well, my company, we had a map of regional that would have been, say, the Denver area, a map of Colorado, and a map of the U.S. or the world. And depending on what scale you wanted to zoom into, you went to a different map. But they're physical maps of real space.
And then what information?
Not of the file room.
Oh, okay. And then what information was on the pins?
It told you where to go in the file room to get the information of the boring logs, or whether there was a geologic map of that site, or whether there'd been an indication of some kind of movement, or an excavation was made and observations from that, so on and so forth. Any kind of data or information that the company owned that would be related to that space in the real world would be
okay. I had it kind of backward. I was imagining a map of your file room, but now it makes perfect sense. Question. So you go to the place you wanted to learn about and then find out what information you had about it.
Before you went to the file room, you went to the map on the wall.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you. You suggest that geotechnical engineers should take advantage of the powerful tools and array of data that we have to conceptualize the 3D underground rather than defaulting to simplification. How would you convince an owner or other stakeholder that is resistant to this approach? And do you feel that there's still a place for simplifications such as soil profiles and boring logs to communicate information?
Well, the easy part of that question is the latter part. Yeah, there's still a place. There's still a place for pencils and paper too, but we use them less and less often. And I think it'd be the same thing with I would imagine with boring logs and so on. So there'll always be a spot for them, but I think it will be less and less. The other part of the question about how do you convince somebody, that's hard. When you're talking about augmented reality and doing something that's quite a bit different than that, there's really no home for it. It's not clear with this owner where it would belong. It's not really a geotechnical service, and it's not really an IT service or what have you. It's a communication tool. It's an evolution of geomatics, of drafting, or something like that, perhaps. So it is a struggle to figure out where it fits in the first place. And so I found that to be a little bit of a hurdle. In terms of explaining, I'm not an expert in the area. I didn't do any research in it. I stumbled into it. I've only learned that it's valuable by accident and by taking a little bit of a risk to bring it to a meeting that I was part of and to try it out. And I think the best analogies that I can explain to people now is that if you experience something in an augmented reality 3D environment, you're living it. If you take a 3D object that has been created by many platforms that are available now, and you move it around on your 2D screen and you look at it from different angles, it would be kind of like having something read to you. And if you had somebody else driving and steering this object around while you were passively sitting there, it would be like being read to. So the difference between experiencing it in 3D is like living it versus reading it versus having it read to you. Yeah, you can't get rid of the experience once you've lived it. It's part of you. So getting into that 3D environment is really impactful. I like that.
So you feel like augmented reality is a way to kind of convince owners that that using data this way could be valuable?
My experience is that owners that are very familiar with a project, a site, a problem, something like that, they think they know it well. Light bulbs go off when they see it in a 3D environment. And I can only say that from experience. I'm just trying to explain why that might be.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm curious about the concept of cognitive load. You mentioned it in your article, and I think I kind of understand what it means, but how have you personally, or how have you heard of others using information about cognitive load to inform us on how to use 3D information properly? Because I can imagine that's a reason why people kind of crave like putting something in an alignment or putting something into boring logs because they want to like be able to wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, I think I heard as a colleague of mine, Bill Burton, who used the word, and I don't really know what it means either, to be honest with you. But it resonated with me, and I knew what it meant to me, and it was kind of like bandwidth. And he and I and others were talking about in a 3D environment with all these sources of data, there is so much you could show, but there's only so much that you can interpret. And if you only have that amount of capacity, and if the way things are shown are different from one setting to another setting, or for one client to another client, you have to use some of that energy to figure out what is being shown and then figure out what does it mean. And so if you think of it, there's only so much capacity you have to work with. Our objective in the visualizations is to be respectful of that and not overload it. There's an article in this edition of the magazine on geophysics, and it dawned on me after the fact. Another colleague of mine, Ben Rivers, and I wrote papers years ago about why is geophysics still innovative. I mean, it shouldn't be. It's been around forever, but we still keep talking about it in like the future. And I think one of the things with geophysics that was a challenge is that, as computing power got better and there was more and more capability for doing things differently, geophysicists were always reporting their results in different ways that may by themselves be a better way of looking at things, but they always required the engineer to kind of rethink and put a big part of energy into what is this showing instead of what does it mean for my project. So,
yeah, so every time.
That cognitive load barrier has been there for a long time, but now I'm experiencing it in the 3D environment.
No, that's interesting with geophysics. My DFI committee has been talking about that specific concept and how to kind of standardize it. Because it's like if every time an owner has to deal with it or an engineer has to deal with it, it's like a whole new thing to process. You don't become efficient at actually using the information that it's providing. All right, so talking about data and information, you mentioned the difference between these two things. You talked about it a little now. Can you kind of dive into what exactly you mean by the difference between data and information, and also discuss why information such as GIS may be reasonably kept private, whereas data should be made available to everybody?
Yeah, the way I see it, the data and innovation, the data and information separation there, the data are the facts. You can have different interpretations, but you can't have different facts. And so, like if it's a cone penetrometer, the CPT, you're getting a tip resistance and a skin friction. What you do with those is your own business, but that's perhaps what the instrument's bringing back. An end value from an SPT is a piece of data. The information is what's interpreted from that. As a profession, I think we're very good, or we try to be anyhow, when we write our reports to separate out, what the facts are from what our interpretations are. But we don't carry that perhaps as far as I think we might in the future. I think, data. My belief is that data will eventually become public. The things that are the facts will become public, and the interpretations, the information that comes from them, will become the intellectual property of our profession, of what we're doing. There will be a part of our profession that's collecting data, and that'll be very valuable, but there'll be a completely separate part that will be interpreting it. And I believe that because the data sources will be so rich and so many that one won't be able to really do both. And that we have some struggle now because we're trying to do both. I don't know if I completely answered your question.
No,
there.
that's interesting.
And then the GIS thing, I can comment on that a little bit. GIS is a little different. I mean, of course, GIS is just spatially located information or data, and the layers could be both. So a GIS that contained data, I think, would become, eventually a public source of information, like Google.
That's what Google Earth is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not interpreted. You'd have your own private layers of interpretation that might be stored in a GIS. I wouldn't see those as going public. So maybe that got the other part of your question.
No, that makes sense. So something like the SPT end values of a boring might reasonably be made available to people for the good of the profession, but not the friction angles of the soil or whatever properties you're using.
Digs, for people who aren't
this gets into digs.
Yeah, I think we'll get into digs, maybe later on or something, but digs does that. Digs makes data public. End values will become public through digs. You won't get to own them in your file room in your private company anymore, to be really blunt with it. They will become public. What you can own is what you do with those end values, but the rest of it is going to public.
And I think there's a resistance. I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but there's a resistance among geotechnical engineers, I think, to want to own interpreting data. But, the more, it seems like the more data become available publicly, the more geotechnical engineers might be able to benefit by wanting to take that on.
There's a great example of another article in the edition on SAR, and INSAR is a really powerful satellite-based Earth observation type system of measuring small deformations. It's not new. It's been almost 20 years since I started using SAR, and the thing with SAR is that you can't just look in your own yard, so to speak. you're going to see what's going on in your neighbor's yard. What's going on in your neighbor's yard cannot be held private any longer. The data of what's happening there, if your neighbor's yard is moving, you're going to learn that if you just wanted to see what was happening in your own yard. You can't not see that. And so those data become available. And the only thing that you can own is what do you want to do with that observation that something's moving in your neighbor's yard. That you can choose to act on or not. But the data sources are so rich, they're just going to be coming in. The digs are going, when it's successful, data that are collected below the ground surface will be as transferable as those that are collected from an Earth observation satellite.
Interesting. Okay, so do you see this comment that came in on the side? There's a certain amount of I think that this would be the time to, if you want to elaborate on this or comment on it. There's a certain amount of interpretation that goes into data. Some of the assumptions about how the data were collected. Metadata, therefore, is information that needs to be linked to data.
And that's what the digs interchange is all about. How do we collect that? So the metadata, these structures, and part of the reason why these things are complicated is how do we track the metadata? How do we understand the specifics of the data that have been collected? But other articles in this edition of the magazine talk about AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And you can't do these things, or you can't do them well, unless you know the specifics about the data and they're recorded in certain ways that they can be combined and queried, and we can learn from them. So yes, to Sam's question there, that's right. The tracking of metadata will have to be part of this.
Okay, and one more related question before we move on. Are there potential legal ramifications to sharing data in the U.S. that you know about?
I'm not an expert on that, but I think that that it'll be an evolving area. Again, and I think the legal issues would be different if one's considering data versus information, something that's interpreted. We always write in our geotechnical reports that this report was prepared for so-and-so for such and such purpose at such and such time, and that's really all it's good for. If you want to use it for something else, that's maybe not allowed, or it's your own business at the minimum. Those are because that's the blurring of the data and the information that's contained in that report. Mm-hmm. I don't think there'd be liability. I just think the data are going to become public, and in fact, data becoming, maybe it is a better way of saying it, in order to manage the liability with data that you might collect, it might be true that the only possibility is to make them public. I gave an example in my piece about the SR 530 landslide in Oso, Washington. That was really a catastrophic event, and the truth is, data were available before that happened to understand that something was going on that slope. Exactly what it was, or how critical it was, or what action should be taken, that's not really clear, in my opinion. But something was going on, and the data are there, and they were publicly available. One of the things that came out of the settlements following that event, is that those data they were always publicly available. They're just more publicly available now. There's a clearinghouse to where you can see them. You can go there right after this don't do it now, but after this interview, you can go and check out the LiDAR imagery, which is it's aerial, not satellite, but it's observation of the slopes in that area, and you can see that things are moving. And these data are available to us right now. So one of the things that happened as a consequence of that is they said, okay, we got to make sure everybody's aware of these data. We got to make them more public. to go back to my SAR example about looking into your neighbor's yard, one of the reasons, in order to manage the idea that you might know something that's going on somebody else's property, it might be that those data have to become public. Anybody could have access to them. That way you wouldn't have superior knowledge, or you wouldn't be expected to have superior knowledge. And if you had, and that might just level the playing field from a liability perspective. There's one of the reasons why I think data will become public.
Yeah, so if data are public, then they're not yet. Does that obligate somebody to do something about something that they see happening? I guess that's what I can see people being concerned about, that type of thing. Like if you think your neighbor's yard is, I don't know how your neighbor's yard would be moving, but if there's a landslide in your neighbor's yard, are you obligated as a geotechnical engineer to address it?
Well, this is exactly the point. And there's, with SAR, it's a great article in the magazine, by the way, but it doesn't talk about the limitations. There are tons of false positives showing movement within SAR that, and it's the movement or the data, that they are what they are. And they showed that something changed, but you don't know all the reasons why they might have changed. So you can't really go to your neighbor and say, I saw something moving in your yard. You would cause them to stop what they're doing and do something about your claim that you said there's something moving in their yard, but it might not actually even be anything. So you'd be liable for doing that. You'd be liable for not doing it. The solution is to make it equally available to everyone. And if he's concerned about something moving, or she's concerned about something moving in her yard, then let her do something about it. But
if everybody knows about it, then anyone can do anything about it, and it's not like you have to say something because you're the only one who saw it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's a professional responsibility. We're used to this idea that if we see something as professionals, that is, that it's not okay to turn a blind eye to it. But that's in a world of limited data, I think.
Interesting. Okay, so you talk in your article about making the shift from exploring the Earth to exploring the Earth's data, and then subsequently using this data to communicate, as you say, better than ever before. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that concept and what it really means to explore the Earth's data rather than just exploring the Earth as we do as geotechnical engineers?
That goes again to some of the things that are in the magazine. Exploring data is artificial intelligence. I mean, that is a type of exploring data. So, if somebody was intrigued by my comment a few minutes ago about going to the clearinghouse in Oso, Washington, and looking at the LiDAR, they'd be exploring data. These data sources are out there, and we always do that to some extent. If we had a new project, you might explore the data of a project that was nearby, but I think the explorations and the skills needed to do this are AI and machine learning type skills that people that will become more and more a part of our profession. One of the things that we always say is, I think we're in a culture where collecting data is the roots of our geotechnical profession. We have drill rigs, we have agencies that have drill rigs and testing labs and things that are built around going out and getting data. When the UAVs and drones and whatever hit the market, everybody had drones. Everyone wants to go collect the data, but I think that is reaching a tipping point, and the real future opportunities for us are the people that are exploring the data that have already been collected. I like to say other people's data. I think there's a ton of other people's data out there that even from within the same organization, people are more interested in going out and getting the data than seeing what somebody else collected and what might be a secondary value out of something that somebody else collected, and maybe there's a value in it for me, and I can search through this. So I see there's a skill set in the future of people that are good at teasing out additional information from data that were collected for other purposes and by others.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see why maybe we would need to shift our focus, prior to investigations, before we just dive into how to collect this data, shift our focus to be, let's kind of find out everything that's out there before we have boots on the ground and make sure we're educated in that realm.
Yeah.
So we have, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then you asked about, communicating that, I think was the second part of your question, Mary, if I recall right.
Yeah.
My experience with this is it's also another new skill set for our profession is that the communication tools, the visualizations that I've been part of are not done by, geotechnical engineers or geologists. They're done by software programmers, gaming software programmers, people, who program in Unity and do things like that know very little about our profession, but they know enough that they can work with somebody like me, to talk about, these are the important ideas that we're trying to get across in this visualization. How can you program that for me? And so that's a sort of another subset of people that I see in the future of our practice, and that is, the visualization people. We used to have word processing departments back when we had pin maps on. No, we probably still had typewriters then, but after pin maps on the wall, there was word processing departments. I don't think anyone has a word processing department anymore, but we now have these geomatics departments. We didn't used to have geomatics departments either, but geomatics is when we have something geo that we want to communicate with others. You got to put it down on paper. You got to do something with it to get the idea across or to share something. And I see the future as being, this kind of visualization departments right along there with geomatics. How are we going to share and get people to digest this complex information? And I think it's all achievable with new skill sets that we'll bring into the geo practice.
That makes sense, and that's exciting actually. So we have several questions coming in, and I'm going to kind of prioritize those because I feel like it makes this more interesting if we have the audience interaction going on. So you can see them too, but I'll read them for everyone's benefit. Sean from GEI, who I will say has been working with 3D data for much longer than many of us. Sean asks, if data is public, do private clients have to pay for investigations, and would they get reimbursed for it when it goes to the public domain? That's an interesting question. Like, how do we handle the idea that, if there's no data somewhere, then someone has to pay for it, and then it becomes public, and then no one's paying for it anymore?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I think we'll be exploring together the answer to that question for some time. One of the last, it seems a shame right now, but at the Geo Congress in February, one of the last conversations I had there was with a gentleman, I believe he was from Singapore, and it was looking at the digital twins that we were building with the augmented reality and saying, Scott, in Singapore, all of these data go into a central database, and we own them all. We could do this for the entire country, and there are other places that are maybe similar to that, where there's a wealth of public data that's there that you could build these models already, and then a private entity could be contributing data to that could be reimbursable in some fashion if they're contributing to a greater good. It's an interesting idea. The DIGS, approach that we're using is, that Ohio DOT is really pioneering this, but others are right behind, and AASHTO is now the Highway Transportation Officials Organization in the U.S. is right behind on this. Is about making all of the data that private entities collect for a public owner transferable, so that we all get to work with each other's data. The private side is another step beyond that. Be interesting to see.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine it's something that, as this, right now it's kind of a free-for-all. As this continues, there will probably become more like standards and regulations and ways that people typically handle it. All right, so I don't know who this is, but the question is, boring logs and INSAR data are interpretations of measurements. Where do you draw the line between interpretations and raw data? I guess I would say boring logs, I guess that's kind of a gray area. So there's definitely some interpretation involved in creating a boring log for sure. End values are the data, but that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it's not an easy one to answer. And you do come across that in my realm of taking borings and making visualizations out of them. And going back to the concept of cognitive load and how much data can you share. At my current use of the technology and my current understanding is that I can't show the detailed boring logs for every boring in a visualization. It's overwhelming. So there needs to be some kind of interpretation at that level. It's almost like going to a stick log in a drawing or something, and needs to be referenced back. If the question was more fundamental to that the person in the field that's doing the logging of the drilling that's going on is making interpretations as they go, that's a more sort of esoteric question. And, somewhere along the lines, we have to describe what the real data are. They aren't, and maybe that's not so easy either, but they are as close as we can be to the factual pieces of information that can be described by other pieces of metadata, a standard way we collected them, standard ways we describe grain sizes and colors and moistures and densities and so on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go back to a couple of the questions that we had on our list, and then as we have time, I'll go back to the chat box. So let's say I have a complex site and I'm visualizing it in 3D. I still need to do geotechnical analyses such as settlement and slope stability. 3D analyses are definitely possible this day and age, but they're not always practical due to long calculation times and having enough information to model the site accurately. Can you comment on your experience with 3D geotechnical analyses and when they are and are not appropriate?
Yeah, I can, and I'm not an expert on 3D analyses. I've been involved with a number of them through the years, but there are some problems that are out there where the third dimension is essential. In fact, for the last Geo Congress, we developed a visualization of a solution to a landslide in Minnesota that the third dimension was necessary because it was a couple planar, we had sort of more of a layer cake geology, if you will, and we had some other planar shear fins that the designer wanted to, was designing. We weren't involved with that design, but we were involved with showing it for the audience at Geo Congress. But the spacing of those fins and their sizes and the proportionality, it's a 3D problem, and 3D analysis was perfectly appropriate there. There'd be other places where I would imagine that the temptation is to go to a 3D analysis because it's not easy to conceive of what the critical and appropriate 2D analyses might be. and you say, oh, this is a mess. Let's just throw a 3D model at it and hope that we get something that's meaningful, or trust that we get something that is better than we could have done by 2D analysis. That's probably a dangerous spot to get yourself in. Mm-hmm. The visualization in 3D of the augmented reality stuff would be a wonderful spot for helping you visualize all those data that you have, where you have gaps, and maybe if you need to plug some gaps, that's one thing, or if you could figure out some 2D analyses that could also be done with the data that you have, that would allow you to verify and the work of the 3D model, or maybe to skip it altogether.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you still feel that there's being able to visualize in 3D and then simplify for the use of for an analysis in 2D still is generally.
I think that would be a much more common scenario. Visualize your data in 3D and understand what 2D configurations are going to be best. I mean, there's still, one of the things we've used our visualizations for is to show how little we know about the subsurface, like how much void space there is after a really thorough investigation program. And these are the locations in real space of where you actually know something. There's a lot of unknowns. And so, there's a lot of void space down there. And throwing a 3D model at something just to try and ignore that is not a good practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to pronounce these wrong. I should have asked how to do this. Doctors Macheras and Iskander wrote an interesting article in the issue about artificial intelligence in geotechnics. In it, they discuss the potential to automate many processes in geotechnical engineering, such as soil classification and pile capacity calculations. In my own career, I've seen the reliance on computer software for analyses increase, and I've heard many people express concern that as engineers move farther from drill rigs and hand calculations, they'll fail to develop a deep understanding of soil and a strong sense of engineering judgment. What are your thoughts on this issue, and how can we continue to keep young engineers grounded in this world of big data and powerful computer software?
That's a good question. I might spin it around a little bit, though. I think what we should focus on is keeping a sector of our practice grounded, and let the other ones fly. I don't think it's going to be fruitful for us to try to keep the people that are going to be getting the most out of AI and machine learning grounded in something. I think what's fruitful is for us to figure out a way that the grounded people know how to communicate with the people that are going to be flying with AI and ML, and so I see that as kind of important. The same thing true with visualizations. I don't think the visualization people need to be grounded in what does it really mean to do a pile design. They need to be focused on how do I get this idea across to somebody in a visualization, and then the grounded person needs to communicate. So I think if it's an impossibility to go broad and also stay rooted. We will struggle if we try to do that, Mary. So I think it's okay to sort of let things go away from that. It may be uncomfortable, but it's part of the growth that we'll see.
That's an interesting perspective, and not one I've really heard a lot before. So it's like we're working as a team. We need people kind of on both ends. But I think what I see people worry about is that we're like losing the people who want to do the work to really understand soil.
I don't think we'll lose them, and I worry about that. I got into this profession because I love, the dirt and rocks and water and being outdoors and working in it, and that you could actually do real engineering with it. I think there will always be a room for that kind of person. I'm never going to be an expert in machine learning. I'm going to appreciate it, and I'm going to know how to talk to people and say, these are the things that are important to me, and these are the lessons I want you to learn from the data. Or actually, I might not even have that right. They may be coming to me and saying, Scott, are these important lessons to learn from these data? And it could be flowing that direction.
Yeah.
Probably as likely as not, it's going to be flowing that direction. And I'm going to be getting, observations from people, and I'm going to be saying that's just not a meaningful observation for my project at my site. But that other one is, that's good. Let's explore down that path. So it's a communication there that will be valuable. I don't think we can keep everyone grounded, and I don't think we want to keep everyone grounded.
Yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate that perspective, and it's going to be good for me to take forward too. All right, last one I want to ask from the list is, how would you address concerns regarding loss of data over time due to software and hardware changes if data in 3D visualizations of sites exist only in digital form? And Dr. Hashash did touch on this issue in his commentary, but I'm interested in your take.
Yeah, that's a familiar question, I should say, because we've all had it, and if we've been around a long time or even a short time these days, you've seen things, platforms change and how we collect data. Interestingly, I'm in a pretty new office here with BGC in Golden, and meaning we don't have a lot of, we don't have decades of being in this building or being present here. So I recently had the need to find something. I knew I had a CD, or DVD or something like that in my home files, and I knew it had information on it that I thought would be valuable to work we're doing. Actually, work related to machine learning, but I got the disk. I don't have a disk in my drive. It took me a week to find, and my own external disk drive wasn't working. It did take me a week to figure out how to get data off of that disk on someone who had a disk drive. And this was before we were all quarantined at home. But it was just still, these things are hard. They will be hard. We'll struggle with doing that. I did get the data eventually. It was useful. And we'll see those kinds of things happen in the future. But to be honest with you, I think data are going to be coming at us so fast from the front that we won't even be able to worry about the data we can't find from the back. It's like whether you go to your file drawer right now to look for that great paper that you saw once, or you just type it into the Google bar.
There's always going to be times when there's always going to be exceptions, and there's always going to be someone that says, like, I did this thing in 1995 and I can't find it, and it's just completely killing the project.
There will be, but I don't know if it'll be completely killing the project or not. It'll feel like it is.
Figure it out.
I think we'll get through it.
I mean, I've always found a way around it, but it's definitely a common concern. Okay, so I'm going to touch on these last couple of questions here in the chat bar, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, we got the question. Big data is becoming mainstream for geotechs. Processing some of these data sources are primarily done using open source packages or software for machine learning or AI. What do you think is the acceptance level of the industry in adopting open source applications in practice?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I'm not sure that I really have a great answer for it. It's not, I would say my only answer is based on my judgment of where we are as a practice and sort of our attitude towards these kinds of things. And the observation that open source software is becoming more and more common. I'd say those are two kind of opposite poles on my answer. I would say that generally speaking, as a profession, we're pretty shy about open source work. It's not verified. It's a professional license that's on the line to accept something that comes from that. The license isn't on the line, but it's that the responsibility is what we are working with. So we tend to be a little bit shy, but I see open source being used more and more in a lot of different ways, and you know, that idea is probably similar to my thoughts that data become public. You know, some of this will probably just have to get used to.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that probably a lot of the software companies won't really like if we make that shift, but there are other industries that are doing it all the time. So I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, or they'll find new ways to innovate. You know, with the open source, they make it put a better front end on it, or do something that makes it faster and easier for you to use, or allows you to verify something more quickly. There'll be ways that they can be creative and still add value, I think.
Okay, so the last question is about digs, and we haven't talked too much about digs, but they asked, Dr. Anderson, do you have any recommendations about the path or timeline to implement digs in real applications with 3D visualization or virtual reality in some real design projects? So I guess the question is just, I'm not sure if you fully understand the question, but just how easy is it to like make the leap from having digs to using virtual reality?
Well, the virtual reality software applications, and again, the work that I do is all in augmented reality. So I'm going to speak more to that. Right. It's different than virtual reality in that the augmented reality is something new added to your environment, a hologram typically, and the virtual takes you to a whole new place. But let's assume that it'd be the same in the virtual environment as it is in the augmented one. The software that's written in those applications, for it to take off and be mainstream, these are data-driven software applications that are being used for the augmented reality. So they're taking in a data feed. Digs opens up the door for that in a tremendous way, because as people put data into the digs format, it can be read by other software. That's the beauty of digs, really. So the timeline is more about the timeline of digs becoming commonplace in use versus that of getting it into an augmented reality or perhaps virtual reality platform. And digs, you know, digs has been slow to get off the ground. You know, it's been a subject that I've worked in and around for many years, and through the GI and with my role in the FHWA, all these places, digs is getting some momentum now, and I'm really excited to see that. But I think, yeah, the key thing with it is recognizing that, you know, it's the owners that are going to have to make the push for digs, and not the software developers or the engineers that are consultants.
Because you need demand for it, and then once you get the owners on board, the consultants will just have to do it, and then everyone else is going to have to follow suit because that's the way the data will be, like the contractors and other people, right?
Digs allows the owners to get more for less. In a sense, you know, that's what it is. You know, it's a standardization process that allows owners to get more value out of their geotechnical consultants. In the end, the geotechnical consultant will be, you know, just where we are today. You know, we're just delivering more for less. You know, and in the transition, there's great opportunity for geotechnical consultants and software programmers and so on. But the end game, when we're in the steady state, the owners will be the ones, and we all benefit because we all are owners. You know, if it's a public entity, you know, it's we own it. It's us. You know, so it's not bad to think that the owners get the benefit, but that's where it's going, and we'll all get the benefit through the transition of getting there, because there'll be opportunities that come along with change. But in the end, the owners get it. The owners are the ones that have to say, it's important to me that we do this because I want more for less.
Yep, that's interesting. That makes sense.
Owner can say that.
And anyone who's watching who doesn't know too much about digs, I'd encourage you to read the article in the GeoStrata issue about Ohio DOT, because it's pretty, I didn't know that much about it before reading that. And now I'm kind of like, we should jump on board. All right. I think that's all I have. I really appreciate you being with us, Scott. This was fun. And Brad, I don't know if you want to say a few more words. I'm just going to put you on the spot to tie it up.
I only have a few. Thanks everybody for participating today. We had some great questions. Everybody stayed online most of the time. Great viewer numbers. And this was episode 1. I think it's only going to get better. Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Scott, and thanks, Aaron, again, for pulling this all together. If you liked what you saw, tell all your friends. We're going to be doing this again. The next date for GeoStrata Extra should be September 22nd at the same time with a different subject. So look forward to that. Check out our virtual offerings later this week and early next week. We will have Bob Bacchus, our Cross USA lecturer, on Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern, talking about data management and big data and geotechnical engineering. Same place, just come to our YouTube channel, click the live button, and you're there. On Monday, the 27th, we will have a session that we're co-sponsoring with USugar, the Association of Geotechnical Academics, on teaching during and after the pandemic. So you'll want to check that out too. And then coming up the week of September 14th, mark your calendars now. Registration is already open. All the institutes of ASCE are pulling together to do a virtual technical content conference. There will be a lot of GI content there, but other institutes as well. A lot of great stuff, earn a ton of PDHs for not a lot of money. And I think that is it for show number 1. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.